Welcome to The Exchange. I'm your host, Rob Cox. Today we're discussing the culture of Wall Street. My guest is former Goldman Sachs Vice President Greg Smith, who has just written the tell-all book, Why I Left Goldman Sachs. Greg, okay, why did you leave Goldman Sachs? I mean, what was the objective in leaving and writing this book, more importantly?
So I joined the firm in 2000 as a summer intern, and I give the place a lot of heart and soul. Out of the 75 people I start with, by the time I leave, there are only 7 of us left. It gets to a point where over time, and this does not happen overnight, but you see this evolution of, even if you look at the numbers, you look at how Goldman earned money in 2001 and 2002, about half the business were the original reasons Wall Street exists, financing things, merging companies. You fast forward to 2007, in a 5-year period, trading is making 5 times more revenue in 5 years. And clearly a lot of that goes to deregulation, Dodd-Frank, Commodity Futures Modernization Act, overturn of the net capital rule. But it also evokes a change in behavior. And I think the client mentality starts to shift from let's collaborate with clients or partner with them to make money, and they make money.
Well, this is the thrust of your argument, right? Yeah. Which is that the culture of a client-facing firm shifted to one where it was our own money at stake, and you could argue maybe that was part of going public. Give us the anecdotes, because we've certainly seen things like Abacus and some of the other deals the SEC looked into. But what have you brought forward?
So I think what's interesting is people talk about Abacus as this crazy deal. Goldman, as you know, settled a $500 million fraud lawsuit. Yet what I don't think people realize is that practice of not revealing to both counterparties what is actually going on is still rife on Wall Street today. And I give an example in the book. Last summer, when Europe was melting down, Goldman traders had a negative view on what was going to happen. Yet our strategists were spinning a positive view to clients so they would buy the banks so our traders could sell the banks. And in my view...
But are you sure that's not because they are sort of ring-fenced? I mean, that was, of course, one of the great innovations of Eliot Spitzer's crusade against Wall Street, wasn't it? To keep research separate from what the traders were doing. Or are you saying they're in cahoots?
No. There's a role on Wall Street called a strategist who actually sits on the trading desk. So, I would go to our morning meetings, and one day, if we had too much inventory in the banks, the strategist would be spinning a tale of it's time for people to buy the banks. 3 days later, change the story. Now that would be fine if you weren't claiming to be a market maker. But what a market maker is you are trying to facilitate the client's business. You're not trying to use the client to facilitate your business. And what I would say is if this was an even playing field, and a lot of this stuff came out in Abacus, if everyone was equally sophisticated, that would be fine. And Lloyd Blankfein, when he's called in front of Congress, he'll say things like, we don't owe clients anything in terms of telling them what's really going on. But I guarantee you a teacher's retirement fund or a philanthropy or a university endowment is not coming to Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley with a buyer beware attitude. They're coming because they actually want some advice. So I would say there's a big misconception out there.
Now, are you satisfied? I mean, the only book has just come out, but certainly there's been a lot of negative press or criticism of the book. You were on 60 Minutes on Sunday night. Do you feel like you've reached the objective that you set out to achieve?
Well, why don't I tell you what my objective is? Yeah. My objective was not to write an expose. It was not to write a tell-all, as you introduced it. My objective was actually to write this for a non-financial reader, for someone in the middle of the country, to show a nuance of what Wall Street does well, the positive, effective things to the society, and how the pendulum has swung completely out of control, where 75% of the money is being made in the trading business.
So how will you know whether you've achieved that?
So I'll measure success if people in the middle of America who know nothing about Wall Street but know that there are conflicts of interest can actually read the book and understand in simple terms how does Wall Street walk this fine line between spirit of the law and letter of the law and move just over that line. And people ask, why has no one gone to jail for the financial crisis? And the ironic truth is a lot of this stuff is still legal. Ripping your client off, overcharging them, no matter if it's a global charity or a hedge fund, that's all fair game. And in my mind, it should not be fair game. I think it should be more transparent. So if readers get that sense, I think
what about Goldman Sachs? I mean, part of the interesting element of this book is that you were a guy cut of Goldman cloth. You were there for 12 years. You started right out of school. Aren't you trying to change the culture of the firm, refocus it back to what you believe were the better days? And if that's the case, couldn't you have just done that internally? I mean, wouldn't it have been more effective because now they're just vilifying you.
Yeah, and I think it's a classic case of shoot the messenger. You know, I think over the last year, as you know, Goldman Sachs released a year-long business practices study committee where it tried to address the conflicts of interest. And I wanted to give that study a chance to see if it was real introspection. But I saw over and over again in the last year when I would sit in one-on-one meetings with partners who would acknowledge these ethical and cultural issues behind closed doors, but were unwilling to change anything because they're so vested in the system continuing as it is. So ultimately, you know, I wanted to actually bring this to light because I could see the system is not going to change internally. And if the system can become more transparent, I actually think people on Wall Street will be less compromised to make morally dubious decisions if they're no longer being asked to do that.
Goldman Sachs will say this is all sour grapes. What do you say, and you can respond to that, I think you should, but sure. What, the people out in the rest of the world who read this, they're going to say, oh, well, this guy was taking the Goldman coin all the way through and didn't do anything about it, and now he comes out and he's on 60 Minutes, and he's on the exchange, and he's selling a book. I mean, what do you say to those two levels of criticism?
Well, what I say to people is I worked at Goldman Sachs for 12 years. I covered a lot of my clients for 7 or 8 years in a row. I personally, and I'm not a perfect person, but I made conscious decisions, and I write about it in the book. Certain products, I just decided not to sell them to clients because I did not think they were right. You know, I give an example of a product in the book I call Clorox, which, you know, you could say is a little bit akin to an abacus in that it is a proprietary Goldman product that is designed to offer a service to clients. What clients don't know is these products are being targeted at the least sophisticated investors, and the idea of the product is to almost build this black box that promises great results, but effectively skims off $2 or $3 million at the outset of the trade. And clients like pension funds or mutual funds do not understand this. So, you know, I would say to people, I worked hard for the money I earned, but I was certainly.
What was your best year at Goldman Sachs?
You know, the best years were in the mid 2000s.
I mean, pay-wise,
just to
like 2006, 2000. What was your take-home full compensation in the best year? You think?
I mean, it was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, which is a huge amount of money for anyone in America. And frankly, I think everyone acknowledges Wall Street has kind of come to a point of a real compensation bubble where there's almost this perverse incentive where you look at the example of J.P. Morgan, where, you know, a group that's widely perceived on the street, the CIO group, as being a prop trading desk, loses $6 billion. The person running that group leaves with a multi-million-dollar golden parachute, and Congress allows J.P. Morgan to claim it was a hedge. But anyone who knows what a hedge is, it's something that goes up $1 when something else goes down $1. So from my standpoint, there's this incentive to swing for the fences. If things work out, you get a $50 million bonus. If things don't work out...
Hasn't regulation certainly changed a fair amount of that, whether it's the Volcker Rule elements of Dodd-Frank, capital standards, clawbacks? I mean, all of these things are meant to address that. Are you saying they'll have no effect?
Well, regulation has changed slightly, but what I would want your viewers to know is 4 years after the crisis, 2 years after what people called landmark financial reform was passed, less than 1/3 of the laws have been implemented, and more than 3/4 of the deadlines have been missed. And during that time, Wall Street has spent $300 million lobbying against things like regulation of derivatives and banning banks betting with their own money. So I think there's a perception that we're out of the woods, but in my mind, what's happened is you've almost put a Band-Aid on a leaking dam. And I think the great danger now is if you don't actually fix the problem, you know, it recedes into memory, and the circumstances that led to the crisis have not been fixed.
Right. So what's next for Greg Smith? You've written the book. You're not going to work on Wall Street again. I'm just telling you that.
Oh, thanks.
But no. But what is your plan?
Yeah. Well, look. What I would say is, I do think, in a sense, to your point about working at Wall Street, Wall Street does have this mentality that what Wall Street is it's just about rich people and big banks. I think what Wall Street forgets, and what I heard from thousands of people after the op-ed, is this idea that Wall Street is actually entrusted with Main Street savings in terms of pension funds, mutual funds, philanthropies. So the sense that Wall Street is Wall Street and it's a different world to the rest of America, I would actually say people want a greater fiduciary standard and they want Wall Street to be more trustworthy. But in terms of what I want to do, I actually want to try to take a role in trying to bring in an inside perspective as to what needs to change. And I am constructive on Wall Street. There are things that Wall Street serves the economy, serves society for, but in my mind, that pendulum has swung to a point where it kind of incentivizes maximum risk, but threatens everyone else in society.
Right. Well, thank you very much for your time, Greg.
Thank you.
Good luck with the book.
Thank you very much.
I'm Rob Cox. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again soon for another episode of The Exchange.